Good morning. I'm Harley Schlanger from the LaRouche Organization with your daily video update for December 14th, 2022. Today I'm going to take a look at some review of developments of the last week, which show very clearly that we're in a rapid descent into a future dystopian era. This is clear in terms of the developments on the economic front, as well as on the danger of an accelerating and expanding war. Let me just give you a couple of hints initially on what kind of discussion is going on around this. The former head of the U.S. Army in Europe, General Ben Hodges, who now lives in Germany, stated yesterday that Ukraine will be expanding its attacks on Russian forces, and he said that he expects a Ukrainian victory in Crimea by August. This has been a line coming out of especially British think tanks that they talked about a Crimean missile crisis, talking about challenging the Russians in Crimea. And now you have the former head of U.S. troops in NATO, General Hodges, saying that this will now take place in the very near future. So that's something to keep an eye on. Now, at the same time, you have governments of Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland, among others, issuing a very critical statement against French President Macron for even implying that Russia has legitimate security guarantees. These are the Baltic countries. Poland have been among the most militant in demanding that NATO be more involved in the war against Russia. There are reports of large numbers of Polish forces infiltrated into the Ukrainian forces. So the idea of a wider war is something that's being pushed by these small countries. And the idea that these are the countries that should be listened to, which was put forward at a recent Chatham House event, makes it more ominous when they come out and criticize the French president, who did say, just straightforward, that Russia had legitimate security guarantees that NATO did not take into consideration. There's a very important article I want to call to your attention by the journalist Patrick Lawrence in the current issue of the Consortium News. Lawrence is writing about the implications of Merkel's revelations about Minsk II, which basically said that the agreement was negotiated with no intention of fulfilling it, other than to use it to buy more time to build up the Ukrainian army. Lawrence describes this as a fatal blow to trust in diplomatic affairs, which I think is absolutely accurate. And here's what he went on to say about that. Since the U.S.-Russia trust has already been eroded, what does this say about the role of Germany? And he writes, quote, "If scorched earth diplomacy is a fitting name for what the West has been up to in its dealings with Russia since 2014, as I think it is, the German bridge between West and East has now been burnt," unquote. So the role that Germany had played in the past with Ostpolitik and could play in the future has been thrown out the window, not just by Merkel's revelations, but by the fact that this is what happened after the 2015 Minsk II agreement. The question had been raised, why did Germany and France do nothing more to enforce this agreement? Well, we now see they never had an intent to do that. Now, I want to just clarify the issue of the so-called nuclear threats from Putin, because we keep hearing this, that Putin threatened to use nuclear weapons. What Putin stated was the official Russian policy, which is that they will use their nuclear force only as a deterrence, and that would only use it if the survival and the existence of Russia were threatened. That's the same nuclear doctrine in the U.S. Nuclear Posture Review, but the U.S. has been tweaking that recently. And in particular, Biden announced that the U.S. has now adopted a first strike nuclear policy as a theory of a preventive strike. So what did Putin say about that? Well, his actual comment on this is, quote, if a potential adversary believes it is possible to use the preventive strike theory. Well, we do not. This still makes us think about the threat that such ideas in the sphere of other countries' defense pose to us. In other words, since the U.S. has withdrawn from nuclear treaties, since the U.S. has changed its no first strike policy, should Russia just sit there and wait until it's struck? Now, that's what Putin is raising, but he did not say that Russia has definitively changed its policy. Remember, officially, in January of this year, the permanent five nuclear powers, which are the US, China, Russia, the UK, and France, signed a statement which said nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. So it appears as though the US is the first to back away from that. Keep in mind that the US is the only nation that's ever used nuclear weapons in war. Now, another development from yesterday is the Group of Seven recommitting to what they called, quote, our unprecedented coordinated sanction measures against Russia. And they said that the sanctions will be continued as long as Russia continues in the war. Now, sanctions are supposedly an alternative to war, but in fact, this is war by other means. And if you look at the casualties, in some cases, more people are dying as a result of sanctions than the wars that they either preceded or that preceded them. The famous case is 500,000 Iraqi children died from lack of food and medicine after the 1990s U.S. sanctions imposed on them, which Madeleine Albright described as justified, given that it played a role in ultimately bringing down Saddam Hussein. It's justified to kill 500,000 children, and that's better than war. There are children dying today in Yemen, in Afghanistan, in Syria, in East Africa, and probably many other places in the world based on US and NATO sanctions. It's ironic then that the US-Africa summit, which opened yesterday for the first time in nearly a decade, that one of the first things on the agenda were sanctions. Now, the summit itself is a reflection of concern that the United States has over the diplomatic gains that have been made by Russia and China in Africa. But how are those gains made? They were made by agreements to provide and deliver real development aid in the form of power plants, medical care, high-speed rail, and so on. The extension of the Belt and Road Initiative. This has been part of the growing concern from the West that Russia and China are winning support of African countries, not by sending in weapons, but by sending in development aid. And by development aid, I don't just mean emergency food supplies, but actually building up the infrastructure on the African continent. Why won't the United States try that? Well, instead, the same day this summit opened, the U.S. announced sanctions against 4 officials in Zimbabwe. And they said this, they hope, will send a message to Zimbabwe toward having a peaceful future. So the idea that sanctions is not part of warfare, well, I think most of the rest of the world, especially countries that have been the victims of sanctions, don't see this as a peaceful way of imposing policy demands. Now, I want to just announce to you that the Executive Intelligence Review will be holding a virtual summit this coming Saturday, December 17th at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. I will be a participant, as will be Colonel Richard Black, one of the co-founders of the Veteran Intelligence Professionals for Sanity, Ray McGovern, and Helga Zepp-LaRouche, and we'll probably have other speakers. The topic is, quote, Peace on Earth or Humanity's Doom, the Case for Negotiations. So we'll begin 11 a.m. Eastern Time this Saturday. The host will be Dennis Speed of the EIR, and Helga will be participating after she has just been the recipient of the Freedom of Expression Award given by the Mexican Club of Journalists. So put that on your schedule, join us then. And look, this situation is increasingly demanding motion from the population, a citizens' movement, not just in one country, but in all countries. And that's what we're organizing. So join us for that. You'll find more information about this on the schillerinstitute.com website. And I'll see you again tomorrow.